So I want to thank Rabbi Mendy and for all of you for being here tonight, for giving me the opportunity to kind of share some Divrei Torah with you. The idea here, Rabbi Mendy said we should do Nach. So I thought that we can begin, because we have only a few times that we'll meet, at least for now, that we can begin with an overview of the Sefer Nevi'im Rishonim, right? The first Nevi'im, right? And tonight we're going to look at Sefer Yehoshua. When I say overview, right, what do we mean by that, right? I'm not talking about, kind of breaking down the book into sections, although I've put for you on the source sheets a very broad kind of sectioning of the Sefer, right? So we can have an orientation as to what the Sefer is, and we'll look at that. But more a question of what is an overall theme, an overarching theme that is important to have in mind if one was to read the Sefer, right? If one was to go through Yehoshua. And I hope that I have absolutely no idea nor assumptions as to what kind of, Nach learning people are engaged in. Unfortunately, oftentimes it's not always central, right? We go straight to the Talmud, and there's reason for that. Tosfot is very well known for saying that everything's in the Talmud. That's why it's called, to play on the words. Tosfot says, Talmud Bavli, Hakol Balulbo, right? Everything is mixed into the Talmud. As you get through, you certainly read through and get it. But there's no question about the fact that nothing really can replace learning the Makor, the Sfarim in the Makor, to be able to see the books of the Tanakh and the Ar Mefarshim in their source. And so if that at all encourages one to kind of, engage in actually learning the Sefer, Hinei Tov. But regardless, it's helpful to be able to recognize kind of some of these broad ideas that are presented. And so what I wanted to do with you tonight in the time that we have, because I know that we have a hard stop at 9, there's Kol, if I'm right, Pachot Yoter, is to kind of look at key themes in the book, to be able to have a sense of really what it is that it's telling us and what it is that it's meant to kind of present in its broadest terms. So Chazal say, so I've given you a source sheet. Not all of the sources that I'm going to quote are in this sheet, right? Some of them I just wanted to put on here to be able to orient us, but nonetheless we're going to kind of speak about some things outside. Chazal say a very interesting thing about Sefer Yehoshua. And because we're coming up on Purim, which we're actually going to have to talk a lot about tonight, right? But because we're coming up on Purim, I'll mention, there's a very famous Rambam at the end of Hilchot Megillah. We have a Rambam here, easy access? Easy access? No, it's okay. No. It's at the back. I see it's back. So I'll quote it for you. You'll see it afterwards. The end of Hilchot Megillah. The Rambam writes, Kol la'atid lavo, right, in the end of the days of Mashiach and further, Kol hasfarim atidim libatel, he says. All of the Sfarim are ultimately going to be nullified. Which Sfarim is he talking about? The Sfarim of the Tanakh. And he says all the Sfarim except for Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, that will remain, right? Why? Because they're the mitzvot, right? The mitzvot remain forever, and one other Sefer. And the other Sefer is Megillat Esther, which is fascinating, right? Again, not for tonight. We're going to be speaking a lot about Purim tonight and Megillat Esther and so on because it coincides. But what Chazal do say is that the back of that halakha is another way to look at it. And that is that none of the books were meant to be written. The only one that was meant to be written, this is another way of looking at it, as I said, was the books of the Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, and Sefer Yehoshua. Everything else was written because we made mistakes, because we failed, because there were issues going on, and so there needed to be Nevi'im sent to Klal Yisrael. There was complaints of all sorts, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to engage and intervene, and so these books chronicle the issues and failures of Klal Yisrael, which we will talk about at least in terms of the Nevi'im Rishonim. But you think about, the Haftarot that we read. How often do we read a Haftarah? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is talking to Israel, saying, "Listen, come back, do tshuva. I'm bringing this to you, that to you." These books are responses to essentially failures in terms of our engagement with the Brit, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Chazal say, on the one hand, the only books that should have been written is the 5 books of the Torah and Sefer Yehoshua. On the other hand, the Rambam says they'll be nullified. except for Megillat Esther. So there's this interesting thing between Sefer Yehoshua and Megillat Esther, which I'm going to put on the side. But what they mean, they extend, Chazal extend, and they say the reason why Sefer Yehoshua would have been written is because it talks about the coming into Eretz Israel. And that's meant from the beginning. That was the whole thing. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to Avraham Avinu, very interestingly, he does not talk to Avraham Avinu about a Torah. What does he talk to Avraham Avinu about? What is the key pact and promise that he makes with him? It's on what? The land. Yitzchak, same thing. It's the land. Yaakov, the land. He hires Moshe Rabbeinu at the burning bush, at the sneh. What does he say to Moshe Rabbeinu at the sneh? He says, I have a Torah to give Am Yisrael? No, he does not say that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes no mention of a Torah at all, except for one hinting phrase. He says, oh, by the way, ta'avdunoti ala har hazeh. Goes later, you'll come and serve me at this mountain. That's all it said. It doesn't say, Moshe Rabbeinu, I have this beautiful gift to give Klal Yisrael. I want you to go in and take it out so I can give it to. It's not mentioned. What is mentioned to Moshe Rabbeinu? I promised their forefathers land. They're in the wrong land. They're stuck. I want you to take them out and bring them in. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is hired for. Unfortunately, Moshe Rabbeinu only does half of that. He doesn't end up being able to bring them in. Who does? Yehoshua. So Yehoshua, and we're going to look at that, right? Being the Talmid of Moshe Rabbeinu, he's a Talmid Muvhak of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? He is the Talmid of Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the one that ends up bringing them in. And that book is essential, say Chazal, because that was the goal of the entire Brit in the first place. Right? It was the whole impetus for the start of HaKadosh Hu talking to Avraham Avinu. So that's a key book. So that's helpful for us just to be able to know in general, right? The book was always a key aspect of the written Torah, of the Torah Shebichtav. It talks about the whole goal of Klal Yisrael starting with Avraham Avinu from the beginning, which is Knisa La'aretz. So it's a major work, right? This is majorly important to us. But there is a massive shift that occurs between the death of Moshe Rabbeinu and the taking of the mantle of Yehoshua, his student, in terms of what? In terms of the interactions between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the people. There is a massive shift. The question is, what is that shift? What changes when Moshe Rabbeinu dies, right? The opening words of Sefer Yehoshua is Vahi Acharei Mot Moshe. And it was after the death of Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to Yehoshua. And he says to him over and over and over again, two words. Anybody know what those two words are? I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just checking to see where the audience is. Anybody know what those two words? He says it over and over. He says, Chazak ve'emat. Again and again and again. Again, I encourage you to read it, right? I encourage you afterwards, before you go to sleep tonight, kind of reviewing the shir. Read the first perek of Yehoshua, reflecting on what we spoke about. Keeps telling him strength, courage, strength. So there's some kind of chizuk that needs to be given to Yehoshua over here. Yehoshua needs to bring these people across the Yarden into the land. And there are very clear shifts that are starkly marked by the people, right? What are some of the things that change? One thing that we know changes, which is explicit in the Psukim, is that throughout the years of the Midbar, the people had a very special food service. Right? What was the food service? It was the man. The man ends when they cross the river and come into the land. Stops falling. What else do they have to do when they come into the land after the river opens? Very interesting, a very strange thing. Sorry? Well, that might be. The washing up entails a very key surgery for all of the men. There's no Brit Milah going on in the desert. Right? We don't always pay attention to that. But for the 40 years of the desert, there was no Brit Milah. We're going to have to understand why. there was no Brit Milah, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Yehoshua, after they cross the Yarden, he says, look, you're going to need to do Brit Milah to everybody. So there's like a massive Brit Milah that's held for everybody after they cross the Yarden, which is extremely telling. Extremely telling. So the man stops. You know what else stops? The Ananei Kavod, right? It says Aharon dies. That slows down. Miriam dies. The Be'er ends, and the man was left in Zchut of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu dies. It holds until they cross the Yarden. That stops. And they are told explicitly, you will now need to eat from the produce of the land. Well, how are they going to do that? What does it require of them? It requires them to work the land. So what's changing here? What's changing here? Think about what's going on in the Midbar, what's going on in the desert, and as they come through the Yarden, what's shifting?
Relationship with Hashem.
How? So I said that. That's very good. But how? What's happening?
He's giving to them all the time in the desert.
Yes.
And now they have to work for their work.
Precisely. So in a certain way, there is a bit of a stepping back of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, the stepping back is not because anybody's done anything wrong. Why is he stepping back? This is very important. I want you to work with me here a little bit, just a little bit. Why do you think why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu not doing these things? He's not giving them man. He's telling me, you're going to pull it out of the earth. I need you to do Brit Milah now. What's happening?
He wants them to stand on their own 2 feet, become a bit more independent.
Wants them to stand on their own 2 feet, become more independent. Absolutely true. Can you elaborate on that?
He said to Abraham and
Yeah.
Isaac that he would take them to the land of Israel. He's now put them to the land of Israel.
Yes.
And they're back. They're back.
So they're there. What does it mean to be engaged in Brit, I ask you? Is Brit unilateral?
No, it's to cut yourself off and knowing now that you're in the land of Israel. And it's a cut like a spiritual cut off. You know that.
Well, a bit. We'll see. It's a bit of there's certainly a distancing, but remember, remember the war with Yericho. The walls come down, right? All they have to do is just do like hakafot around the city and the walls come down. So it's not a detachment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence completely. But again, I ask you, is Brit unilateral? No, what is it?
Well, you give me this and I give you that.
It's bilateral, by definition, right? Covenant. It's a contract. 2 parties. Yeah? There's HaKadosh Baruch Hu on one end, and there's us on the other end. Until now, we are not yet of age, so to speak, to engage fully in the contract. Why? Because we come out of Mitzrayim, and we are, for all terms and purposes, inept. We're not capable of coming out of Mitzrayim and being full-fledged members. As a matter of fact, let's not forget that the entire adult cohort that comes out of Mitzrayim dies in the Midbar because they couldn't hack it. In other words, they come to the land. Remember, this is not the first time that they're coming to the edge of the land. The first time that they come to the edge of the land, Moshe sends 12 spies in, and it's a complete failure. They can't hack it. Creates Tisha B'Av, creates the 40 years of wandering in the Midbar, right? The first go was a non-successful go. So they're not ready. So what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to them? It's very poetic and yet poignant at the same time. The people say, Tapenu yu lavaz. The Meraglim come back and they say, our children are going to be destroyed. They're going to be completely lost. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response to them is, the children that you were so worried about are the ones that are going to go into that land. And you are going to fall in the desert, right? Which is precisely what happened. So another thing that's very important to recognize is that the people that we are reading about in Sefer Yehoshua, meaning Klal Yisrael, in Sefer Yehoshua, are the children of the people who left Mitzrayim. If they left Mitzrayim, they were under 20 years old, or born in the Midbar, and may never have even known Mitzrayim. What were they born into? What were they born into? They were born into they're certainly born into freedom, but they were born into a system in which bread was falling from the sky. They, like Moshe Rabbeinu says to them before he dies, "Simlatcha lo balta me'alecha ve'raglecha lo batzeka ze 40 shana," which means your clothes did not wither, your feet did not swell 40 years. You were completely air conditioned, completely environment conditioned, you were completely taken care of, held, embraced, and brought through by God. This is where people are born in, which is a wonderful way to grow up. You're supported. But there does come a time, like at Bar Bat Mitzvah, for example, in which you are now on your own in terms of your responsibilities for managing mitzvot, for managing this relationship that you have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the reason for that at Bar Bat Mitzvah, why is it then? Because that's when we come of age, as it were, and begin to be people who relate to a world in relationship terms. Before we get to that point in life as human beings, we don't really engage in relationship-oriented thinking. What do I mean by that? Children, it's not an on or off button. I mean, there's gradual progression towards it, but the younger a child is, the less a child is thinking, how can I make you understand what I'm saying? There's no sensitivity or very little sensitivity to what your world is, as opposed to my world. How can I speak to you in terms of your world so that you better understand my world, which is an adult thing to do, which many adults still have trouble with, but nonetheless. But children only look at anyone and anything as extensions of their own world. Piaget points this out, right? He was very famous for his studies that he did on children. But essentially, children think in terms of me and what you are to me. And at what we call puberty, right, which is essentially 12 and 13, which is why there's different ages for boys and girls, there is an awakening almost overnight of out there and other people that I can relate to and engage with and so on and so forth, and how it is that I am able to begin engaging. And because of that, we can begin engaging with Kadosh Baruch Hu also in a way that we were not ready to beforehand. So at the point of crossing the Yarden, there is an allowance. What do parents need to do with their kids when they start to get to this age? Do they not have to start taking steps back? I mean, it's the most difficult thing sometimes, right? How do we do this, right? Without kind of keeping on, it's like helicopter parenting, as they call it, right? Always hovering over them and watching what's going on. It's not an easy thing to do. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing it, and He's modeling it. And one of the ways that He does that is that man is no longer falling from the sky. He's telling Yehoshua, they now need to actively engage in Brit again. Do Brit Milah. The 40 years of the Midbar, they were not actively engaged in Brit. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was taking care of them, but they were not engaged. They didn't do Brit Milah. Why? Because it wasn't fully functioning in a practical way yet. They crossed the Yarden. You're going to plant your own food. You're going to reap your own food. You're going to be, as you say, independent, standing on your own 2 feet, but so that you can be a genuine other in this relationship that we have. There's you and there's me. And we are going to interact that way. I am with you. I support you. This is a joint endeavor between you and me, but there's you and me, not me and me, right? Which in the Midbar, for all intents and purposes, they were very small. They were treated that way. So who's Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moshe is not the one to do this. Moshe is the one who takes care of these people like a mother carries a nursing infant. And by the way, I'm not drawing that analogy from the top of my head. Moshe Rabbeinu himself says that. Where does he say that? He says it in Parshat Baalotcha. When does he say it? He says it when the people complain for meat. Remember that story, right? People complain for meat. Moshe Rabbeinu, it is one of the worst breakdowns of Moshe Rabbeinu's career, if not the worst, which is very, very strange, because this is a man who's gone through the golden calf, who's gone through the 12 spies coming back and destroying things. And when the people complain for meat, what does he say? I mean, the most harsh response to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not even to the people, just to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know what he says to them? He says, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Im kacha at oseh li. He goes, if this is what you're going to do to me, you're going to make me have to find meat for all of these people? Horgeni naharog. Kill me now. I don't want to see my own wretchedness. He says, Ata omer elai, he says to HaKadosh, he's talking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu this way. He says, Ata omer li, ha leta'am hazeh. You're telling me to lift this people. Kenoseh ha'omen et hayonek. Like a nursing mother carries an infant. Minayin li basar, he says, where do I have meat? What is Moshe Rabbeinu saying? He goes, I only have milk, I don't have meat. I'm a nursing mother. That's what you've asked me to do. And it is what I'm doing. It's, by the way, what the man was for Bnei Israel all of those years. It was mother's milk. That's why Chazal say, this beautiful Gemara that says there are some things that nursing mothers shouldn't eat when they're breastfeeding. Garlic, onion, things like that. And there's the same thing on the Gemara. It says, oh, and by the way, there were certain things that the man didn't taste like. You know, the Midrash, it says the man tasted like anything you wanted, except for garlic and onion. So anybody who likes that stuff, unfortunately, it wasn't there for you. But nonetheless, it's another way of showing the man is mother's milk. Moshe Rabbeinu is nursing mother. Incidentally, think about it. All of the mentors, supporters, kind of adults that were caring and took care of Moshe for his life when he was young were all women. It was Bitya bat Paro, it was his own mother Yocheved, it was Miriam, his sister, right? So Moshe was okay, he was comfortable with nursing the people, nurturing the people, taking care of the people. What was his Torah like, by the way? Did his Torah leave any room for anybody else to say anything? No, it's also in Balotcha. You know what else happens in Balotcha? The Pesach Sheni happens in Balotcha. What's Pesach Sheni? Pesach Sheni. There were people that are Tameh Nefesh Adam. They were, for whatever reason, Tameh. They couldn't do Korban Pesach in its time because they were Tumat Met. So they come to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, Lama Nigara? Why should we be kept out? There's got to be an option for us. With Korban Pesach, we shouldn't have an opportunity to do. What does Moshe say to them? He says, look, it's a good question. Let me ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he goes to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is what they should do. Next month, this time, they'll do the Korban Pesach, Matzah, Maror, they'll fulfill it that way. And by the way, say, for all future generations, anytime anybody's got an issue where they're Tameh, L'Nefesh Adam, that's what we know is Pesach Sheni. Did Moshe Rabbeinu say, hold on, let me go and see, and I'll do a bit of Shaklavataria, and I'll go ask, I'll talk to my Chavrusa, and we'll figure it out, maybe I'll write a tshuva. No. What does he do? He says, I'll ask God. He asks God, and it becomes part of Torah Shbichtav. It's written Torah. It's, you want to know what it is? I'll tell you. You're hungry? I'll feed you. Interestingly, what were the people complaining for when Moshe Rabbeinu had this big nursing mother breakdown? Meat. Meat is very different than milk, isn't it? I mean, mother's milk, by definition, is baby food. All milk is baby food. We just drink cows' baby food. But milk, by definition, is baby food. It's perfectly tailored to the baby. Meat is the exact opposite of that. You need an adult to be able to have meat. You need to know how to slaughter the animal. You need to know how to skin the animal. You need to know how to be able to cut away the pieces of the meat. You need to be able to know how to cook the meat. You certainly need teeth in order to be able to bite the meat, chew the meat. You need to be able to have a strong digestive system in order to be able to digest the meat over a period of 2 weeks. That's adult food. And the people were asking for adult food. Perhaps one of the reasons why mixing milk and meat is a no-no. And all Moshe was saying to them is, I am not a meat person. I'm a milk person. I don't know why you're putting me in this position, he says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's answer to him is, I didn't ask you to do that. I'll do it. Let me do it. I'll take care of it, Moshe. Don't worry. Interesting, he doesn't say to Moshe Rabbeinu, he goes, now Moshe, I know you can do this. Like he does at the sneh with the burning bush, when Moshe says, try to find somebody else, I don't think it's me. There, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you can do this, Moshe. I'll be with you. The meat milk issue, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you're right, I'm not asking you to do it, I'm going to do it. You're fine, don't worry. Also, interestingly, that's where the Sanhedrin is birthed. Because in those same psukim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, he goes, by the way, Isfu li shivim zkenim. He goes, Moshe, could you get 70 elders around for me? I'm going to ask them to help you out. In the meat milk complaint, that's where it happens. Why? Because it's the setting up of the Sanhedrin. Which is very important, because the Sanhedrin is in charge of what?
Justice.
True, but in Torah terms, what are they in charge of? Which laws? Halacha. What we would call Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Rambam, at the beginning of Hilchot Mamrim, he says, Bet Din HaGadol, which is what we call the Sanhedrin, right? The Supreme Court. Hem Ikar Torah Sheba'al Peh. They are the very roots of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Not Torah Shebichtav. Torah Shebichtav is locked. It's done. You can't add or subtract to it, correct? Right? Lo tosifu alav v'lo tigra mimenu. Who gave us Torah Shebichtav? That's Moshe Rabbeinu, the ultimate Navi. He's speaking to God, God's speaking through him, he's dictated to, he writes it down, that's Torah Shebichtav. What's the Torah Sheba'al Peh? What's the Sanhedrin doing? What's the Bet Din HaGadol doing? Interpreting. They're interpreting. They're looking and saying, okay, we can apply it this way. We can do it. The whole Talmud is all of the discussions, essentially, of a Bet Din Gadol, and establishing how it is that they are applying the principles of Torah Shebechtav into practical terms. That's Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's Brit, my friends. That's covenant. Because the Torah is not just HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying to you, this is what you do. It's saying, these are the principles that I'm telling you need to be able to adhere to. You decide how it is that you want to apply them. And that's what the Bet Din HaGadol does. That's their legislation. That's how they legislate. It's like the Midrash of Chazal. Elle mo'adei Hashem mikrai kodesh asher tikreu otam b'mo'adam. You know, anybody know what Chazal say on the asher tikreu otam b'mo'adam? Al tikreu otam ela atem. Don't say otam, right? You tell me when you see Rosh Chodesh, I'll adjust my diary accordingly. That's Brit. So a very important aspect of the Brit is that it is not unilateral. It is bilateral. It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu and us. And we have a say. So I want you to take a look at one thing on the sheets that I gave you to be able to recognize this. Very interesting Gemara. This is on the second page in Halchot in the Masechet Tmura. You see it? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Have you got it? Bottom of the second page, yeah? Or is it the second page? Yeah. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, 3,000 halachot nishtakhu b'mei ovlo shel Moshe. When Moshe Rabbeinu died, 3,000 halachot were forgotten in the depths of the mourning of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay. Interesting. Amru lo Yehoshua. Interestingly, the people were very used to this kind of thing. When they didn't know what to do, what did they do? What did they do? Well, no. When Moshe was alive, when they didn't know what to do, what did they do? They asked Moshe. And they said to Moshe, could you please ask God? And Moshe said, yeah, hang on, I'll ask God. It's the same thing with the Benot Tzlofchad, right? Remember that? Benot Tzlofchad come up to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, why should we be kept out? Moshe Rabbeinu says, hold on. Ken Benot Tzlofchad doberot. Tell them this. So they had 3,000 halachot that were missing. So they went to Yehoshua. Amru lo Yehoshua she'al. They said to Yehoshua, go ask. Navi, was it Navi? Go ask. What did he say to them? Lo b'shamayim. He said, it's no longer in heaven. I can't do that. If we don't read any more of the Gemara, you already see that it's absolutely fascinating. There's a hard stop after the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, that no longer is there accessibility through Nevuah, through asking God, in order to be able to determine Jewish law. The law has been given, It's all written. That's what we call Torah Shebichtav. Everything else after that, that's up to you. The very famous story in Bava Metzia. You know the story. With Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer Agadol. You know the story? I'll tell you the story very, very quickly. Very quickly. Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, Rabbi Eliezer, was known to be a machmir. He was Beit Shammai. People were concerned about the fact that he was always machmir. So there was an entrepreneur who decided that he wanted to make an oven. In that time they had ceramic ovens that could very easily become tameh. So he had some ingenious ideas to be able to make an oven that would not become tameh, or it'd be very difficult for it to become tameh. He also felt, if I can get the approval, the haskama of Rabbi Eliezer, everybody else is in the bag. Right? If Rabbi Eliezer, who's the most machmir, will give me haskama, everybody. So he goes to Rabbi Eliezer. His name was Akhnai. This was Akhnai's oven. He says, "Can I show you, Rebbe? What say you?" He said, "It's Tahor. It's good. It's great. Okay." So he start manufacturing it. But he's in the Beit Midrash, and Rabbi Yehoshua is there. Rabban Gamliel is there. Rabbi Akiva is there. He asks them. They say, "No, sorry, it's tameh." He was a curveball, right? He was not expecting that. Rabbi Eliezer was not pleased. Rabbi Eliezer then said, "If I am correct in my ruling, the tree that's outside should show." And the tree uproots and moves 10 parsah and replants itself. Crazy. The whole best man is like, this is crazy. Who was expecting this morning, right? God, this. Rabban Gamliel, who was the Nasi, he very silently and stilly said, "Lo b'shamayim hi." We do not determine things by heaven. You can do all the tricks that you want and all of them. You can ask, for all the help that you want. It's inaccessible. It's what's the word? Sorry?
Ineligible.
It's ineligible, yeah. It's ineligible to be considered in our legal determinations. We determine the law. Rabbi Eliezer is very, very upset. He's not having any of this. He says, if I'm correct, then the stream that is running outside should show. And the stream starts flowing the opposite direction. The whole Beis Medrash is getting very agitated now because he sees that Rabban Gamliel very, very quietly and still says, "Lo b'shamayim hi." Rabbi Eliezer says, if I am correct, and he's getting not very, let the walls of the Beit Midrash show. And the walls of the Beit Midrash start caving in. At that point, Rabban Gamliel says, "Stop." And the walls stop. And the Gemara says they stayed that way out of kavod for both of them. Right? They didn't go back and they didn't fall. And Rabban Gamliel at that point, this is where the story takes a very hard turn. Rabban Gamliel at that point put Rabbi Eliezer in cherem. You didn't learn this in Bava Metzia? Go back, right? And he says, put Rabbi Eliezer in cherem. And he said, "Lo b'shamayim hi." We do not determine halakha that way. The halakha is acharei rabim l'hatot. We determine halakha according to the majority opinion. I'm the Nasi. My chaverim have agreed to the halakha of this oven. You, Rabbi Eliezer, are dissenting, and it's unacceptable. And you will be kept in cherem. And at the end of the day, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabban Gamliel had quite a tumultuous interaction, which I leave you to look at afterwards, because we don't have the time tonight to continue the story. But that's an example of the fact that there is a hard and fast rule that from the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, nothing in halakha is determined from the Shamayim. It's inaccessible. I keep saying inaccessible. It's inadmissible. That's what I want to say. It's inadmissible. It is not accepted as far as law is concerned. This is one of the reasons why Eliyahu Navi, there's a whole discussion whether Eliyahu Navi's opinion holds weight. And Chazal say if he's having his own personal opinion, that's fine. If he's trying to communicate to us what it says in Shamayim, it's inadmissible. Right? So this may sound very strange, but why do you think that this is the case? Based on what we've said. Brit. To not have that rule would abrogate the Brit. Because the Brit is HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the principles in the written Torah. Your job, bilateral, your job is to now take those principles and you determine what the halacha is. That's the partnership. And in order for that to happen, HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps back. He gives room for us to be able to do that. Of course he could tell us what the answers are. But as any good teacher knows, it's not always advisable to tell the students the answers. Sometimes you really want them to discover the answers on their own, so that they have some ownership of the knowledge and the engagement, which is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does.
Isn't it deeper than that?
I think it's more deep. Yeah, of course it is, but I'm giving an analogy. But what say you?
Well, only because quite clearly it actually goes into the principles of right and wrong.
Go ahead.
Because there were two arguments running in parallel between Rabbi Yez and Rabbi Gamliel, both of which consider themselves to be right.
Yes.
And in fact, in a sense, the right one was wrong.
What you're pointing out is that there is a cosmic right and wrong, and there is a local right and wrong. And what Rabbi Eliezer was trying to say is, cosmically, I'm right. And what Rabban Gamliel was saying is, it doesn't matter.
Isn't this the first part of self-determination where God has given us the initial laws? Yehoshua has taken over. He says, right, now you have to control yourselves.
Yes, but the only thing that I would add to that is, it's not now you guys go off and do your thing. It's you need to be a full-fledged individual if there is going to be genuine relationship between you and me here. Because you need to be a you. Right? So in the same way that in any important relationship in our lives, it is very important that there is not one or the other in the mutual relationship that is overbearing or overpowering the other. Right? It's not relationship. That's control. Real relationship is sharing between two individual parties. So there needs to be two clear people that are able to come together and be one. But the one is made of two unique individuals. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is insisting on over here. And that's what's happening when Yehoshua comes into the Aretz. So that is the whole beginning of Yehoshua. That's what happens, right? They forget these halachot, according to Chazal. They go to Yehoshua and say, go ask. And Yehoshua's response is the same response of Rabban Gamliel to Rabbi Eliezer. Lo b'shamayim hi. So who ends up saving the day at the end? Otniel ben Knaz. Take a look at the end of the Gemara. First, Yehoshua was getting into deep hot water because Klal Yisrael were not being patient, right? Saying, so at the last line it says, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Lomar lecha efshar. He goes, I can't tell you what the answer is. I've locked that out. Tordan b'milchama, he goes, why don't you get them involved in war? So at least it'll shift some of the heat. So it says he does that, but then it says, Amar Rabbi Avhu. Rabbi Avhu says, Af al pichen, even though he needed to distract them and they forgot all these halachot, Hechziran Otniel ben Knaz mitoch pilpulo. Otniel ben Knaz, through his intellectual engagement and endeavor, his pilpul, brought them all back. He was able to renew all the... That was acceptable. That was admissible. Why? That was the point. You figure it out. Even if it's not what the cosmic answer is. You've done it, everybody's agreed, you followed the rules as to how you're supposed to do it, which there are rules, Gezerah Shavah, Klal Uprat, all right, the Shlosh Misrei Torah Nidreshet Baeh. You've done it well, I will, Kadosh Baruch Hu, I adjust accordingly. That's part of the Brit. You tell me when Rosh Chodesh is, I'll adjust my diary. You've determined that the interpretation of this particular halacha is this way. That's what the majority of the Sanhedrin agreed to. I adjust accordingly. Why? That's the Brit. That's our relationship. As long as you never say that what's written in my book is no longer valid. Which is why he says to Yehoshua, and you may know this because we include this in the davening, Lo yamush sefer haTorah ze mipicha. Interestingly, Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Yehoshua at the very beginning, goes, this book that you've got, this Torah that I gave you, the written one, it should not leave your mouth. Your mouth. Doesn't say it shouldn't leave your mind, it shouldn't leave your mouth. Why? That's Torah Shebaal Peh. When you engage in Torah Shebaal Peh, it better be based on all of that's written in there.
So when did that stop?
That's a very good question.
And when it stopped, this is the second question. When it
Yeah.
stopped, does it mean we don't have a Brit anymore?
So I'm going to say to Rav Mendy, this is another shiur, right? But to answer you very briefly, right, when we no longer have a legislative body that is empowered by Torah to do so, we lose the capacity to do so. Does it mean there's no Brit anymore? Quite the contrary. Because we have the Brit, we adhere to the rules of the Brit, and we do not legislate without the legislative body. So what that means is we're stuck. Because it means there is a lack of movement in terms of the determination, responsiveness of halacha. But because of the Brit, we wait. So now, recognize that. I want to now the second section of this, yeah? So now that we've established this, we recognize that what's happening with Yehoshua is that there is Brit is being kicked in again, Brit Milah is occurring, man is stopping, you eat from your own toil and drawing from the earth, you determine the halachot, you just make sure that you adhere to my book and my writings and so on. We have this bilateral covenant, unique relationship of you and me. This is how it's running from now on, yeah? I'm going to take a step back, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to give you room to be able to do this, but I am right with you, I am partnering with you, we're going to do a joint endeavor. Not like the Midbar where I was running everything. Joint endeavor. You do your thing, I do my thing, and we're going to run that way. Yehoshua is the man to be able to do this. And Yehoshua continues. But there is this interesting aspect of it that also comes in. And that is that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps back and allows for room, it needs to provide a certain level of license, a certain level of liberty, right? In other words, what did Otniel ben Kenaz need, for example, in order to be able, through his pilpul, to bring the stuff back? He needed some latitude. He needed options to be open to him. In other words, it wasn't determined for Otniel ben Kenaz what the answers were going to be. There were possibilities, yes? You with me? The possibilities, right? If they were determined, then it would have been easy. Follow the formula and finish. It doesn't say that he followed the formula. It says, mitoch pilpulo. Pilpulo means he was going through very creative ways of looking at this. That's what pilpul is. So that means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu stepping back allows for a certain element of non-determined realities.
So there's no wrong as long as it followed.
It's not that there's no wrong. There had to be rules. They had to adhere to certain rules of adjudication and legislation. But if they adhered to those rules, what their determination was the reality. What I'm saying is more than that. What I'm saying, the very allowance of process means that there is an indeterminate aspect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's pulling back. Well, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu's there, the answers are there. You ask God, He tells you the answer. There's no room. There's no chance for anything else to happen. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu stepping back allows for is room for possibilities that you need to discover. Right? Are you with me on that? Right? Which is why, how is the land and its divvying up determined? Anybody know? How do we determine which shevet gets which piece of land?
There was a guidance note in one of the
Well,
the size of it.
No.
One of the sidras.
The size was made as a result of which shevet got the land, but we didn't know which territory they should be in. How do we know which territory they should be in? How is it done?
A few of them chose it.
Come now, come, yes, and on the Ever HaYarden, but that was not that was a whole problem, wasn't it? It was a huge issue.
The blessings that each tribe got. Nothing to do with it.
Goral.
I forgot the reason why.
Goral. Lottery.
Lottery.
Yes. That's Beferish. That's Mefurash in the Sefer.
It had to be, didn't it? Because some of the tribes elected to go.
Yes, some of the tribes elected, and it was a huge scandal. Moshe Rabbeinu got very, very upset. They had to kind of he had to relax, and there had to be an agreement, and they had to promise that they were going to go in and fight with the people all the way till they were done. Ended up spending 14 years away from all. But that was okay. That was the thing. But that was not expected. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the way that you determine which shevet gets which piece of land is goral. Lotteries. That's very strange. Nobody would have guessed that, right, if we didn't know it. Size of it, once you realize the territory, you can draw the lines that fits the shevet.
It's the only goral that everyone gets a winner.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. Depends which territory you want. But it's interesting. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting that is the mechanism here that Yehoshua has to do. What is goral? I mean, what is the meaning of that? It's certainly indeterminate, right? We're throwing things into chance over there by definition. That's what a goral is. And however it comes, it comes. So it's part of the way that we do things, which is strange. But it also shows that we are not just going to ask for answers. We are allowing for the natural flow of things to be able to determine things for us.
It's almost like the first signs of democracy.
Well, maybe.
Because beforehand, it's almost like living under Hashem's rule. He was the dictator. And now all of a sudden he goes, right, you're on your own, set up your own.
But I want to caution again, not you're on your own, right? Very important but you are right about the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking a bit of a removal of the controls, right? As it says in the Sefer also, it says, Ish tachat gafno v'ish tachat teinato. Everybody was sitting under their fig and grapevine and fig tree. They were very happy, said Shalom alai nafshi. They were finally there, and they had some of their space. So there is definitely a pulling back in terms of control, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is no longer going to ask God for the answer. There is an openness, which is what the Goral very strongly shows, right? Let's see where things fall.
Does that not allow errors to then start to creep in?
Does that not lend?
Errors now.
Errors?
Mistakes.
Errors,
Yeah.
yes. I thought you were saying Hebrew, errors. I was like,
Errors.
no, errors. Yes, of course. But that's okay. Nobody died from mistakes.
But it's almost
Right?
like
To answer that, right, consider what moed do we have that deals with mistakes? There's a whole moed that we have that deals with mistakes. What is it? No, a moed, a chag. Not a chag, it's not a chag, but a yom tov. Yom Kippur. What is the central avoda of Yom Kippur as the Torah prescribes it? Not as we do, as the Torah prescribes it. What's central avoda? What is it? What's the avoda? The avoda. There was only one person who did avoda on Yom Kippur. And what did he do? What was the centerpiece of the day? Was the kapara, right? And what was the major kapara? Anybody know? What? Shtezim. There was one ez LaHashem and one ez LaAzazel. They had to be identical. They had to be of same height, same age, so on and so forth. And how did we choose which ez went to Hashem and which ez went? Oh, interesting. So there's something about the fact that there is room for error, which also is room for forgiveness, which also is room for return. Another way I like to say it is, if there is no chance, you don't have a chance. It's done. The only reason you have an opportunity to be able to do tshuva is because there is an openness to the possibility of you being different tomorrow than you are today. If everything is determined and locked in, you're stuck. So Yom Kippur is very much a day of Goral, because Goral indicates that there is an openness to possibilities. Not everything is shut and closed. In the Midbar, there was no room. You messed up, you died. There was no, right? Think about it. What were the stories in the Midbar? Bnei Israel messed up, snakes biting them, everybody's dying, right? You messed up, you're complaining for meat, drop dead. How many times? Think about it. I mean, if you're familiar with Sefer B'Midbar, how many times was there a mistake and an immediate response of punishment? That stopped also. It was a very different regime. There was no room, there was no wiggle room in the Midbar. It was boot camp. There was no wiggle room. Once there's an openness to growth, development, working on, sure there's going to be error. But the thing that allows for you to grow in the first place is an openness to possibility. That's why, by the way, the word for mercy in Lashon HaKodesh is rachamim, right? Rachamim, the root of rachamim is rechem. You know what rechem is? It's a womb. A womb. And what is a womb if not a space that expands to allow for developing life even though it's not ready yet to live? That's what mercy is. Mercy expands the openness and possibilities of life even though they are not right now worthy. We will give them some latitude. That's what Yom Kippur is. Yeah? And Yehoshua was very much that person. So even though he was a Talmid Muvhak of Moshe Rabbeinu, right, he was the one that was dealing with the people. He was the one that was going between Moshe and the people. He set up, right, it says, one of the things I brought you on the seats. Why was Yehoshua the one chosen? He set up the Beis Medrash. He set up the chairs, he got the drinks, he did all of that. He created the environment that allowed for people to come and learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. He was sensitive to what the people needed. And that's why there's this just beautiful one line. Is it? On the second page also, one line from Gemara Eruvin. Yehoshua ohev Yisrael haya, second thing. Yehoshua loved Israel. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't love Israel? Of course he loved Israel. But why does it say that about Yehoshua? It says about Yehoshua because Yehoshua made sure that the people had access to Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah. In ways that were just very, not directly related to the learning, but just so that I could sit and learn. So I have a chair to sit on, so I have a drink of water to have while I'm sitting. I mean, look, we're not in Olam Haba, we're in Olam Hazeh. Those things are very important. Yehoshua was very, very sensitive to those things. And amazingly, when you learn the Sefer, which I hope you do, you will see that there was no dissension through all of the years of Yehoshua's leadership against him, which is unheard of. He had the full support of all of Klal Yisrael, the entire tenure of his leadership. Remarkable. Because he really did know the people. And he really did understand that they needed room. And that there needed to be some openness for them. So it's all Goral. This is also the reason why, and we're going to close soon, right? I'm going to close this out. And the next, if it's okay, can I have 10 minutes? All right. Yeah. Okay, so remember that Moshe asks Yehoshua to do a major task. A major task. Bnei Yisrael, it's this week's Parsha. So pay close attention, right? It's very important that we're doing this in this week's Parsha. The sea splits. You know, Am Yisrael, they walk through the sea. Egypt is decimated. They come out. And soon after that, they are attacked. By whom? Amalek. And how does Amalek attack them? Yeah, ambush from behind. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you need to have a punitive strike against them. You can't just take that line there. You have to retaliate.
Merciless.
Huh? Merciless. It's not merciless. It's not merciless at this point, but war is war. Right? War is war. It was before, any of the, international... So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, wage war with Amalek. And who's in charge of the troops? Yehoshua. So interestingly, the same man who's setting up the Bet Midrash, and making sure that people have what they need, the same man who has to man the Goral, right, for divvying up of the land, is the man who fights Amalek, interestingly. Do they defeat Amalek? No. What it says is, Vayachalosh Yehoshua at Amalek. They weaken Amalek. And they're able to live to fight another day. Vayachalosh, right? Again, it's in this week's Parsha, pay close attention to it.
They will come very soon.
Ki ani ratzon. Yehoshua is the man who does that. So Yehoshua is the first one that really starts the fight that we have with Amalek, which then later on it says, midor dor. I mean, this is, a generation-long thing. It keeps going on and on and on. Yeah. what other Chag do we have in which Goral is central? Purim. The name of the Chag is Goral, right? Pur, Hu HaGoral. Purim, we have literally a festival that's called lottery. Yeah, we just don't realize it, but that's the name of the festival. Right? So this is an entire festival that is set up to establish this entire idea that I'm presenting to you that Yehoshua started with. And that is that the way that we run with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not that he manipulates and controls, but that he sets very clear principles. In a sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has said everything that needs to be said. You know, we say things like, oh, if we only had Nevi'im, again, like we listened so well to them when we had them. I said, right? Like we said, Chazal said that there were not supposed to be any other books. We got more books because we messed up. And so, what Purim tells us is it took us 1,000 years to finally figure that out. What out? The whole point of this brit is that it is us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that we are to be full standing members of that brit. And that means that we are meant to derive law from the principles and written Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. We are meant to be able to establish our own understandings, our own life, and our own path, not on our own away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but in joint endeavor with Him. And that's why, of course, famously, I'm sure you've heard 100 times, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name is not found in Megillah on purpose. Why? Because where do you find HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Just pay attention to your life and the world. That's how He communicates. You're wondering where He is? Well, that's exactly what Bnei Israel were wondering back in this week's Parsha when Amalek attacks them. Amalek doesn't just come out of the blue. It starts with Bnei Israel going to Moshe Rabbeinu and saying to him, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu emayin. Tell us, Moshe, is Hashem with us or isn't He? Vayavo Amalek. Why? Because we make the mistake of thinking that the distance or the allowance of us to be able to run our lives and to essentially determine how it is that we're going to engage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah and His Klali means that He's not really paying attention. Well, that's a mistake. There's only one other people that think that. Amalek. Amalek believe nobody's paying attention. It's not that they don't believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they just don't believe that He has anything to do with anything, nor does He care. And the only difference between Klal Yisrael and Amalek is that point. Otherwise, we're the same. Reshit Goyim Amalek, says Bilam, right? Top nation, Amalek. Philosophically, they've got it all down, except for the one bit that you can genuinely live in this world and have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu without Him having to control you, tell you what to do, manipulate you. He said everything that needs to be said. No Navi is going to make anything different or better. He has said everything that needs to be said and more. Are we listening? Are we learning from it and applying? How do I apply this to my life? It takes work, but that's what adults do. We look, we learn, we understand, we apply. Lo b'shamayim. And it took us 1,000 years to get that. But that's what Purim celebrates. And that is why, interestingly, you will know this halacha, that in the cities, the walled cities that celebrate Purim on the 15th, when do they have to be walled from? There's a rule, right? Which walled cities? I mean, not every walled city, some walled... No, there's only cities that have been walled from this time. Which time? From Yehoshua bin Nun. Wow, that's fascinating. Why? Well, he started it. All of Purim is nothing more than a culmination of Yehoshua bin Nun. And recognizing that lotteries are not our foe, it's our friend. Why? Because if you don't have a chance, you don't have a chance. Without chance, you don't have a chance. And that's why the Ari, for example, says that Purim is Kepurim, right? It's Yom Kippurim. That's all of these things are related. And I'm not just saying they're related as a nice vort. I'm saying they're related in terms of genuinely the very daily acts of our lives, which is essentially what Sefer Yehoshua is meant to do. Because remember, as Chazal say, it's the 5 books of Moshe and Sefer Yehoshua. Sefer Yehoshua teaches us how to live as a full-fledged, sovereign, free nation under God.
So is that why when they say, we said Naseh v'Nishma, and they said, I don't know this concept properly, but we said Naseh v'Nishma, and it was only on Purim that we...
Correct. Precisely right. Because it says, Kafalem har kigigit. You know that one, right? Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'll hold the mountain over you. Hold the mountain over us, that's quite coercive, isn't it? And Chazal say, Moda'ar Rabba Leoraita. They say, truth of the matter, yeah, it was coercive, and it should mean that we should be able to opt out. And they say, yes, except at Purim. Because Purim, it says, Kiemu v'kibilu ha'yehudim alehem ve'al zaram. That in Purim, we became adults as a nation, right? Nationally, we achieved adulthood.
Without the mountain over us.
Without the mountain over us. And we understood what it means to be in relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that we don't need him peeking through the curtains every few minutes to say, Mommy's here. We came of age, genuinely in Purim. And so we're still working on it. Right? But Sefer Yehoshua is what models that. And that is why Chazal say, on the one hand, the only books that were meant to be written is the 5 books of Moshe and Sefer Yehoshua. Sefer Yehoshua teaches us how to live free and sovereign under God in Brit. And that includes Goral, it includes distance, it includes room for you to be you, it includes joint endeavor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu determining principle and you determining application. And at the same time, Chazal say, and later on, all the books are going to go away, except for the 5 books of the Torah and Megillat Esther. Why? Because Megillat Esther was the culmination of Yehoshua. I took Yehoshua and actually brought it in. We owned it at that time, which is why the walled cities have to be from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Not from the time of Shushan Abirah, interestingly. No, from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. Why? He started the Amalek fight. We went with Amalek because they were the only other nation and said, yeah, it's all open, it's all free, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu not paying attention. We said, no, it is all open, it is all free, except there's an adult relationship going on over here. And there's room and respect for us in our life, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu as our Lord and our God. And there is an interaction that is between us that runs for all time. And that is something that is very important for us to be able to remember. So that is the overarching, broad stroke theme of Sefer Yehoshua. Highly encourage you to take a look at it and kind of read it through in those terms. And Bezrat Hashem, next time we will look at Sefer Shoftim and see what's going on over there, because there's a big shift in that Sefer.